Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, I'm in a bit of a construction binge, or like differences in European and North American construction techniques. Let's go. Mind Sparks. It's a cool channel name with the X. Preemptive like. Updated version. Scandinavian versus American, California, New Zealand, Russian, Australian building methods. Let's compare. That sounds awesome to me. Sounds like a good time. Hope everyone's doing well. My name's Connor. If you're new, original links in the video top in the description. Why do builders around the world build the same things, but in such different ways? Materials, tradition. Love it. I'm in a really an extra talkative mood right now, so I gotta. As much as I usually don't care if I have something I want to say, I want to say it. But right now I'm caffeinated, and I'm drinking more coffee. But I promise I'll be good.
For those of you who are new to my channel, I have a channel where you can watch me build a house from scratch.
AI voice.
Nordic building styles differ somewhat from the rest of the world, both in a good and a bad way. In this video series about different building styles around the world, I thought I'd try to collect as much as I can in these videos.
Interesting, so crawl space instead of basement.
The last video with the same topic gave over 1,500 comments in a couple of weeks. I have read every single comment at least 2 times. It turns out that my observations of how others build were both right and wrong. With more knowledge, based on your comments and my own research, I want to start over and do a more serious analysis. I made the first video mostly for fun, but the topic is interesting and educational. When I started as a carpenter, I could only dream of content like this. So together with you, I want to gather as much knowledge as possible in these videos, for the next generation of builders. This series only applies to wooden houses that are more common in Northern Europe, Canada, and the USA. Many wooden houses are also built in Russia, Australia, and New Zealand. From roughly the bottom of Sweden downwards, stone houses are...
So what do you notice there? Canada, Russia, America, Scandinavia, these are places with a lot of untouched wilderness, whereas I feel like a lot of mainland Europe doesn't have the same density of wood or availability of wood.
Many wooden houses are also built in Russia, Australia, and New Zealand. From roughly the bottom of Sweden downwards, stone houses are more common. In the US, on the other hand, you find wooden houses all the way down to Florida. In northern Canada and Sweden, log houses are more common, but that is not something I cover in this video.
Is that the real latitude comparison? That's crazy.
The house I am building is located near Stockholm, and approximately at 60 degrees on the latitude scale, which would correspond to northern Canada.
Or about
Sweden is
Anchorage.
a long country with varying temperatures, and we have to adapt our houses for it. There are many of you who question the methods Scandinavian builders use. And at the beginning I didn't understand why. But it's simple. We build the same things, but in different ways. I have been a carpenter for almost 30 years, and the methods I use are not something I invented myself. The only difference is, I am building the house alone, and have to adapt the build for that.
Wow.
My house burned down about 10 months prior to this video. And even though I applied for a building permit for the previous house, which was
I can already tell so much about the work ethic of this guy. Just
completed.
House burnt down, obviously horrible tragedy. And then just getting right to work and building a house that looked very nice, and he's doing it by himself.
2018. And even though I applied for a building permit for the previous house,
Beautiful.
which was completed in 2018, I still needed to apply for a new. I I thought the building permit took a long time to get, but it can take several years in other countries. Apparently this has to do with corruption. So that it took me 3 to 4 months is probably good. Let me tell you how a building permit works in Sweden. I think it is done in a similar way in most modern countries. As I have mentioned in the previous video, it is quite a strict process with personal meetings, many documents and high costs. All rules naturally benefit the industry, which can charge high costs for doing fairly simple tasks. To save time and a lot of money, I did almost everything myself. I have done this a couple of times, and it's very easy. You can actually do everything yourself. The only thing you need to do is to hire an architect or a constructor so that the bearing capacity of the house is correctly calculated. Everything else is paperwork. This is what you have to send in. Construction drawings, similar to what I show now. The drawings must contain cross-sections and weight calculations. You let an expert do this. What you do is draw your house and send it to them and they do the rest. In Sweden, you can Google building permits and you will find several that will help you with this. Cost approximately 25,000 crowns, which corresponds to approximately 2,500 US dollars.
So it would be very stupid to buy all of your building materials you think you might need before sending in your construction plans to, you know, good architects that might be like, nope, too much, too little.
You also need to make a fire protection description that shows how to get out in the event of a fire. You can do it yourself or hire a professional. Cost about 4,000 crowns or 400 US dollars. The constructor must also provide you with dimensioning certificates, facade drawings and site plan drawings. When everything is approved, you will receive a control plan to follow, which you fill in every step of the way. This document must be available on the construction site during any inspection. During the construction, the municipality comes and inspects critical points such as the frame, bathrooms, electricity, etc. But of course it's different in the rest of the world, like in the US as an example according to the comment section. Building codes and code enforcement vary widely across the US. Part of that is because of different soils, weather, and natural disaster risks, but it's also because of how the government is structured. The states have authority over building codes, with limited involvement by the federal government. As a practical matter, the states delegate most permitting and code enforcement to city or county government. Or as they say in Finland.
Permits. I am in Finland and asked the city if I could build a little woodshed in my yard. They told me to get an architect and a contractor.
I started as a house founder and bricklayer when I was young. The most common and cheapest type of foundation we built was crawl space foundations. This type fits well over here, as I am building on a downhill slope.
So no
A
basement.
concrete slab would have been too complicated, and that is why I choose a crawl space foundation. This type of foundation is relatively inexpensive. My foundation with blocks, gravel and concrete cost about 45,000 crowns or 4,500 US dollars. When I compare how we cast the concrete slab for the brick, we seem to do it differently. We usually peel off the entire ground, and then prepare it with geotextiles, and gravel of various kinds. In my previous video, I mentioned that a common method in the US is to dig a trench that you fill with concrete like in this video. This is true to some extent. This method may work well in the southern United States, but worse in the north where they have to build the foundation to withstand frost, and wrap.
Oh, I live in the north, and I mean, when I remember seeing a house that my parents were building, of course, I was eighth grade, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. How old are you in 8th grade? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13 or 14. So I wasn't exactly in. My dad knows what he's doing a lot. Of course, he had a lot of help. He did. This guy's doing it on his own with a few tips from professionals. The amount of respect I have for this guy, it is so large. But we live in Rhode Island, which is in the northern U.S. Gets very cold in the winter. Not like, Maine or Canada, but cold, or Alaska. And we had a full concrete foundation, a basement too, that I remember being built first. So it's probably like a 8-foot, depth, and then all filled with, about foot and a half. Sorry, what would that be? Like third of 1/3 of a meter width all around.
Rapid temperature changes. I have never seen this type of foundation in Scandinavia, but I can see advantages of it in a warmer climate. The method is fast, and gives a strong foundation as you can make it very thick in a simple way. The trench filled with concrete style of foundation is only common in areas with solid well-drained ground. In the Northwest we do our foundations more like this video shows.
Okay, so I'm in the Northeast.
Here's another good comment from New Zealand. There's a similar one from Australia too. The foundation construction is very different, as we have earthquakes in New Zealand, so we need to build our foundations to withstand seismic activity. We sometimes do footings, a trench dug into the ground, reinforcing steel laid on top then encased in concrete, and piles, similar to the American way you showed in the video. I can easily see the advantages of anchoring the foundation into the ground, instead of having it floating on top, especially with countries dealing with earthquakes. Many wonder why I don't bury my foundation below frost level.
The giant cement vibrator to remove air bubbles.
Many wonder why I don't bury my foundation below frost level. I can't, I have rock underneath. The same applies to my water, which can only be buried about 80 centimeters or 3 feet. I anchor the foundation to the rock instead, and use heating cable in the water pipe. I pour concrete for the walls, and to get the levels right.
Heating cable in the water pipes. So you have a conducting cable that flows, that is within your water pipe, that just ensures that the water doesn't freeze? That interesting.
The most commented part was frame.
If anything I'm saying is wrong, guys, please call me out.
To get the levels right. The most commented part was frame construction. Until now, the construction methods have been quite similar in all countries, but now it will be different. We can start by comparing lumber. Canadians and Scandinavians usually use thicker lumber, as we have to deal with snow, and need more insulation. We also have better quality of the wood, which means that we can have a wider CC or OC measurement, which saves money. A longer distance between the studs works well for us, as we have thicker lumber. The wood is also of high quality, C24. Let's look at the CC or OC distance. For those of you who don't know, it means the distance between the centers of the studs. In the US they call it OC, or on center, and in Europe we call it CC, which means center to center. In Scandinavia, the most common CC distance is 60 centimeters, but we also have 45 and 30 centimeters depending on what we are building.
Oh, thank you so much. So 24, so 2 feet.
60 centimeters, but we also have 45 and 30 centimeters depending on what we are building. 60 centimeters for walls, floor joists and decks. 45 centimeters in the ceiling, and when we use 90 centimeters board material. 30 centimeters for denser ceilings, bathroom walls and floors.
Makes sense, you know, the load-bearing parts further down would need to be thicker.
Our CC measures for roof.
Or wait.
40 on what we are building. 60 centimeters for walls, floor joists and decks. 45 centimeters in the ceiling, and
wait a second, that goes against what I thought.
Use 90 centimeters board material. 30 centimeters for denser ceilings, bathroom walls and floors. Our CC measures for roof trusses are very wide, and CC 120 centimeters. More on that later. The rest of Europe seems to have a CC standard of 62.5 centimeters. Their board and insulation are adapted to that measurement. Russia seems to be a mix of the whole world and has a CC standard of 64 centimeters, which is a very odd measurement, given that their plasterboards are of Scandinavian standard, and OSB of German or French standard. But Russia is the world's largest country, and borders the rest of us, so it's easy to understand that they trade materials depending on availability. Australia and New Zealand are surprisingly similar to Canada or Scandinavia with their construction methods. Even their CC measurements follow Scandinavian standards.
I was verified Australian. The Vegemite has his YouTube profile picture.
Construction methods. New Zealand are surprisingly similar to Canada or Scandinavia with their construction methods. Even their CC measurements follow Scandinavian standards. Canada usually takes the best of both worlds, but their CC or OC measurements lean more towards the US, and are OC 16 inches, or sometimes like Scandinavia, OC 60 centimeters or 24 inches, depending on where they build. In the US, the most common OC measure is 16 inches or 40 centimeters. The US is large, and ranges from tropical to frost, so having a specific standard is probably difficult. They also build with Scandinavian measures, OC 24 inches. Canada and the US calls this advanced framing. Not because it is advanced, but more because advanced materials are used to compensate for the load-bearing capacity. Scandinavians build simpler exterior walls, while the rest of the world is more advanced. We don't have to think about earthquakes or storms when we build, so we're stuck with these old methods. This probably includes the fact that we have been poor, and build houses more sparingly. The only thing we need to
And again, just to reiterate what he said, by less advanced methods, he doesn't mean like not as smart. He just means you don't need a strong wood.
Poor, and build houses more sparingly. The only thing we need to think about is the weight of snow, and solve it with a so-called hammer band that helps distribute the weight of the trusses.
Clear the snow off
Instead
your
of
roof
hammer
too.
band, the rest of the world uses a so-called double top plate, which is two joists that tie each other together over the wall, and especially the corners. This method gives more strength to the corners of the house or over the wall. The world uses a so-called double top plate.
Same. Stud. Dun dun dun. Dun 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 dun. Done. Another stud. 2x4 spacer. Double plate. Am I stupid? I don't really see much of a difference here. This is a corner, while this is an intersection. Am I dumb?
Instead of hammer band, the rest of the world uses a so-called double top plate.
Oh, this is talking about both. Okay.
Which is two joists that tie each other together over the wall, and especially the corners. This method gives more strength to the corners of the house.
I thought I was looking at so these are the same examples of a country's method, just on joint and corner joint.
And especially the corners. This method gives more strength to the corners of the house. But a double top plate cannot handle the same weights as a hammer band, and the trusses must be in line with the studs in the wall. I've looked a lot at different construction methods, and I think a hammer band has more advantages than a double top plate, even in the US.
The guy doing this all on his own, it's not like a simple cabin, which is already impressive. Like, the amount of respect I have for this guy is so high.
A standing joist that we jack into the wall studs is what we call a hammer band. The function is the same as a header, but it spans the entire wall. Jacking them in is quick and takes maybe 30 seconds per stud, with the right tools.
This saw doesn't scare me, okay? It's the table saw that terrifies me.
Together with the top plate, you create a type of C-beam that can handle very high loads. With the hammer band, you don't need headers
Guys, my eyes are dry. Just let me do a... Okay.
Doors type of C-beam that can handle very high. Together with the top plate, you create a type of C-beam that can handle very high loads. With the hammer band, you don't need headers over doors and windows. You can also add an extra header, if you have thick enough walls.
A C-beam?
A type of C-beam that can handle very high loads. Together with the top plate, you create a type of C-beam that can handle very high loads. With the hammer band, you don't need headers over doors and windows. You can also add an extra header, if you have thick enough walls.
C-beam.
And you don't need to align the trusses to
I don't know what's C-beam.
Stud below enough walls. And you don't need to align the trusses to each stud below, but it is still recommended to do so. If you need to tie the corners together, as you do with a double top plate, you can do it with a hammer band too by adding one on the long side of the wall. A hammer band on the long side is called Rost band, and is used for other roof types and to tie the corners together better. I don't need a Rost band on my house, as the bottom of the truss acts as a reverse hammer band. What if we did both together better? I don't need a Rost band on my house, as the bottom of the truss acts as a reverse hammer band. What if we did both? Let's use this American frame as an example. There are a couple of details that set us apart. We reinforce openings with a king stud, the same way as Americans. But fire blocks are very uncommon. It's an interesting concept, and prevents fire from spreading between the compartments, but I don't know if it would help us as we have OSB behind the plaster, and usually use mineral or stone wool as insulation. Headers are not needed, since we use a hammer band. We also have a wider CC measurement, but otherwise it looks pretty much the same. Since I am building myself, I wait with all reinforcements so that the walls will be easier to erect.
You're
That's
such
why
a
it looks sparse
freaking
now,
legend.
but there's a lot more to come. Many people wonder why I build walls without a floor, and there are several reasons. For my own sake, I do it to be able to erect the trusses with a certain technique that you will see further on. For practical reasons, it is quite common to do this in Northern Europe. Let me explain. The risk of rain is high over here. The weather can change in a matter of hours. If I insulate and install chipboard, it will be ruined in the event of rain. Many of you say that the floor dries and that there is no risk, but this is not true. If rain gets into the 20 to 30 centimeters thick insulation, it takes months for it to dry, especially for us who have short summers. We are used to working this way. Some over here put the floor on, and some don't, and I'm one of them. I could have put temporary boards to walk on, but I'm used to work like this. For me it makes no difference. Some also say that the walls cannot be attached properly to the floor joist without a floor, but I think it's the other way around. Each nail or screw goes straight into the floor joist, instead of into the chipboard, which should provide a stronger construction. On the short side, I'm waiting with the floor joist to attach the wall, as it needs to be insulated first, but that wall will be properly attached later.
That makes sense. Does he mean because it doesn't have to go through two, like, semi-unattached things instead of just going through one solid piece to the next solid piece?
The wall, as it needs to be insulated first, but that wall will be properly attached later. Here's another reason why I don't put on the floor. The truss has to go down between the floor joists so that I can raise the trusses myself. This is probably not common, and a bit dangerous.
This stuff like this, little things he does like this, it shows you just like how experienced he is in doing this.
But when I was younger I learned the technique from the elders. I have received lots of comments about the trusses having too little wood, and that they will probably break from the pressure of snow. This truss construction is probably the most common in Sweden. We've been building trusses like this for generations, and I've never heard of them breaking or even bending. They are really strong. Just like with walls, Americans and Canadians have other methods, with ridge beams, queen posts and so on. We make it a little easier and it works well for us. Our roofs carry enormous amounts of snow, without any problem.
So then why do we use the ridge beams?
Is that I work a bit backwards. What you see now is far from finished. I will reinforce the walls and the roof.
Well, a great reason to prove why you're right and sometimes working backwards is the way that you're able to move this, roof piece down in so you can fit it up. So you know what you're doing.
Backwards. What you see now is far from finished. I will reinforce the walls and the roof later, as we build another wall, a so-called installation wall. More on that later. I also get many comments that I erect trusses without sheet material on the walls. People are worried that the house will collapse, especially when I put a roof before reinforcement. But I'm not worried. A square with triangles on top is going nowhere. I also have cross rulers to keep everything in place. It would take an earthquake to topple the frame as it is now. This part of the build is very interesting, as there are so many different methods. Modern houses, even in Sweden, have plaster or other boards on the outside walls, but not as much OSB as in USA or Canada. OSB on the outside does not work so well in our climates, with our old methods. So we usually use
Just to be clear, guys, like I've been around a lot of constructions in my entire life. Anything I say where I sound overconfident or I'm like, yeah, and I'm wrong, you could really be right. So call me out, all right? I love this stuff. I've been around house building for a long time, but I'm no construction worker, architect. So questions I ask would love answers. Stuff I say that's wrong, call me out.
With our old methods. So we usually use windcloth or asphalt board. Instead, many of us use OSB on the inside, as you will see later. Having OSB on the inside compensates for the structural load bearing.
Yeah, so OSB, it kind of like plywood. Oh, shoot.
Capacity that we lose. OSB on the inside compensates for the structural load bearing capacity that we lose by having windcloth or asphalt board. As it stands now, the house looks quite fragile, but when the walls are finished, they will be reinforced and about 30 centimeters or 11.8 inches thick.
Thank you so much for the
with
inches.
The installation wall that will be added later. When we make a crawl space foundation, we put a vapor barrier directly on the gravel to prevent vapor from rising into the structure. The plastic also helps against radon gases that can come from the ground.
Is that to avoid rotting of the wood?
Sure.
The vapor.
The plastic also helps against radon gases that can come from the ground. In cold climates, it is common to cross-insulate to prevent cold air to pass through the cracks. We do it in floors, walls, and ceilings. Foam insulation does a better job, but contains many toxins, and therefore uncommon where I am. I think they have a solution with soy-based foam, but I don't know how far they have come with it. Instead, we have companies that inject regular insulation, but it is quite expensive. I have seen that foam insulation is very common in the US and it seems to be very effective. But there also seem to be many who are harmed by it.
Well, we don't use asbestos anymore, if that's what he means.
Chipboard or
it's not great to like if you rolled around in a bunch of like American style insulation, like you rolled around, you're going to be very itchy and have a bad time.
OS seem to be many who are harmed by it. Laying chipboard or OSB as the first floor seems to be the same everywhere. Our chipboards are small as we have rules for how much you can carry. Otherwise, it looks the same in most countries. In Scandinavia, we rarely use OSB or plywood on the roofs. One reason is that we have a very large CC measurement between the trusses. OSB or plywood would not work well. Instead, we use tongue and groove boards. This takes a long time to lay, but it is a very good choice as the house can move better. The correct way to lay tongue and groove boards is as I do now. One at a time so that the joints end up randomly. After a couple of meters I had to change tactics as rain was coming. To speed up the work, I put them in a row. This isn't quite ideal, as you get a long joint which weakens the construction.
Yeah.
But in my case it's okay. I'll reinforce the underside of the roof later, with an installation wall, that ties everything together. But even if I could use OSB on the roof, I would choose...
I wonder why he didn't... Couldn't you, like, rather than stop doing the uneven... what he said before, like the uneven, preferable uneven connections, you know, so you don't have a, same thing goes with like shingles. When you're putting up shingles, you don't want them like all, and so I wonder if maybe waiting and putting a giant tarp over, and then when the rain stops, continue the more random jointing would have been better. But I'm not going to say I know a millionth of a percent of what this freaking legend knows about building houses.
After a couple of meters, I had to change tactics as rain was coming. To speed up the work, I put them in a row. This isn't quite ideal, as you get a long joint which weakens the construction. But in my case it's okay. I'll reinforce the underside of the roof later, with an installation wall, that ties everything together. But even if I could use OSB on the roof, I would choose tongue and groove. It is such a much better choice of material, as it can move and let moisture through better. As a roof covering, I will choose black tiles. It is rare to see Swedish houses with, for example, shingles, which is common in other countries. We choose tiles, or roofing sheets, most of the times.
That's not what I think of as a tile. I know those are like, but tiles are more like asphalt or like tiles. They look like you take apart like a strip of an asphalt road and it's rubbery and you put them on. Not a fun job, especially in like July.
With, for example, shingles, which is common in other countries. We choose tiles, or roofing sheets, most of the times. In Europe, we prefer and mostly use screws for everything, while nails still seem to be more common in the US. Modern screws are very strong and usually stronger than nails,
oh, definitely.
so fewer are needed. A modern screw bend, instead of snapping, just like a nail. According to the comments, many countries are switching to screws, as they are becoming stronger than nails. And as usual, Canadians are quick to adapt. Most of the comments...
It's just like you can't have a screw gun. Well, you can have a screw gun, but a nail gun is just just in. A screw gun, like you have to go... So I feel like nice sound effects, right? Like in places where you want more stronger connections, you're going to use a screw. But if you want to, you know, you don't need the strength of a screw. Nail gunning nails is way faster.
Regarding screw, came from Canada. As I mentioned earlier, we can the nails. And as usual, Canadians are quick to adapt. Most of the comments regarding screw came from Canada. As I mentioned earlier, we can replace the headers with the hammer band. Although it is not necessary, I put a double, just to be safe. The reason I do it now is so that I get insulation in between. The vapor barrier has been a tough debate. We have those who think you should absolutely not use it, and those who think we should. It's a wild discussion. I'm on the side that thinks we should have it. If you have thick walls, moisture can get stuck in the insulation.
I think we just do the plaster slabs right on. I believe.
In my last video, I asked you with knowledge to explain why you should have a vapor barrier. There were more replies than I could imagine, and everyone seems to be on the same page. Vapor barrier is needed in modern houses.
I mean, probably protects against some moisture, and also it's extra insulation.
There were so many good answers that it would take me an hour to show them all. Here is one that sums it up well. Vapor barrier is needed in modern houses that's very heavily insulated. The temperature of the air passing through the wall is linear through a material. If the temperature drops to low, you will have condensation from the air. In heavily insulated walls, that could happen inside the wall, leading to water damage. There were also many comments about having the vapor barrier on the outside.
But then won't that condensation end up soaking the insulation itself?
Depending on the climate. It's beyond my knowledge, but it sounds logical. But with a vapor barrier, good ventilation is required. I will put special ventilation with heat exchangers in the walls after the house is built. More on that in my later videos. This part of the build was interesting. It turns out we're pretty much on our own when it comes to building a plumbing and electrical installation wall. The wall also gives us an...
Don't tell me he does like the HVAC system and the electricity, the electrician work, wire work, and plumbing on his own. Come on, you are a legend.
Opportunity to cross-insulate. The wall also strengthens the house's shear, which we miss if we don't put board material on the wall. According to the comments, Denmark makes installation walls the same way, which I did not know at the time.
Like from this part, guys, apart from the plastic and on top of this looks just like inside of a lot of American construction houses that I see. Like, it looks just like this.
Norway and Sweden do everything very similarly, so it doesn't surprise me if Norway builds installation walls too. Please leave a comment about it. Another advantage is that electricians and plumbers do not have to cut into the vapor barrier when they work. This should be a standard everywhere, as there are only benefits to it and it doesn't cost much to do.
How? Hold on. Where do you put the outlets? Huh.
We probably don't need to discuss gutter hooks. We seem to do it the same way, but
Like, a lot of the time,
cost much to
I believe, if I remember correctly, pre-insulation work. Okay, so remove the plastic and remove the insulation, and I believe then we have the electricians come in and do all of that work, and then we put the insulation in and cut little out like rectangles for where the outlets are, and then we put all the insulation in. Same goes for plumbing, I guess, but I don't feel like a lot of, you know, plumbing goes through normal walls like electric wires do. So where are you going to put the outlets?
to do. We probably don't need to discuss gutter hooks. We seem to do it the same way by attaching them to the fascia. I'm a bit complicated and do it the old-fashioned way, but it's not necessary.
The amount of scrapes on my knuckles I would get from installing the gutters and the gutter hooks, because the shingles that we use, they're like sandpaper, and so you have to lift it up, put your hand in, and like deal with it, and like oh my god, a PTSD.
In Sweden, it is more common to have OSB behind the plasterboard than without. We have an idea that the walls should be able to support shelves, cupboards, and other things. I personally would never buy a house without OSB or chipboard behind the plaster. It is not a big expense. You can also have cheaper chipboard.
Okay, so OSB is what I would call plywood, right? Come on, where this is what I would call plywood. Okay.
To have the price. There are only it is not a big expense. You can also have cheaper chipboards to have the price. There are only advantages to it. In my case, the extra cost is about 10,000 crowns or 1,000 US dollars.
And again, I think we just have the plaster right over it without the OSB. And I think that's a big reason why, like, you can famously like punch through an American wall, because it's just, unless you punch into one of the beams, then you're going to break your hand. But you just go right into the insulation. But yeah, I like that.
Comparing the way electricians do their work is interesting.
Ooh, ooh, ah, ooh. Yes, it is.
Comparing the way electricians do their work is interesting. Scandinavians who build wooden houses always put the cable in conduit, but many countries put cable directly in the wall. To me, it sounds completely crazy, as you cannot replace the cable if you are going to renovate or repair it. But it is of course about costs. Some countries have solved it by asking the customer if they want to pay for the extra material. But how much can a conduit cost? In Sweden it is about 5 cents per meter. In Europe it's all about saving money, but what about in the US? Listen to this. Lower current means smaller wire size. In Europe, the wire inside of the conduit are mostly braided. This means flexibility. Solid copper wire is very difficult, even impossible to pull through flex conduit. Makes sense. Thank you for that. This means wire size. In Europe, the wire inside of the conduit are mostly braided. This means flexibility. Solid copper wire is very difficult, even impossible to pull through flex conduit. Wire
Wouldn't that mean braiding the wires would be more difficult?
makes sense. Thank you for that comment. Just like with electricity, it is common to have the water pipe in another pipe. We call it pipe in pipe, and leads away any leaks. You can also change the pipe without tearing up the wall. More on that in the next part.
So you guys put the outlets and stuff like straight into the beam.
I'll probably do a part 2 after I get a little further. The kitchen I will build is very American inspired, so it can be fun to compare. When it comes to kitchens, I prefer the American style with pot fillers and other smart solutions. So that's what I'm going to build. I think I'll do like the last one. I release a version where I ask questions and show our way of doing things. With your comments, we summarize everything.
What a legend. Chad, legend, boss, freaking awesome guy. It looks amazing. It's looked amazing every step of the way. He has decades of experience. He did it by himself mostly. Goddamn God. That was fun. I turned this into a 41-minute video, and that felt really fast. I find construction fascinating, guys. If I sounded too confident or said stuff that's just completely wrong, tell me, okay? Call me out, all right? Any questions I had, I'd appreciate any answers to those. You guys are awesome. Love you. I hope everyone's doing well, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.